Hi, and welcome to Vote 2018 Santa Monica Rent Control Board. I'm Sandy Jacobson, your moderator for this forum. Election Day is almost here, and this forum will give you an excellent opportunity to size up the candidates for 3 open seats on the Santa Monica Rent Control Board. The individuals you elect will serve 4-year terms of office beginning in December 2018. This forum is co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica Education Fund, working in partnership with Santa Monica CityTV. The League is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that never supports or opposes candidates for public office. During this forum, you will be hearing from all 5 candidates who are running for 3 open seats on the Santa Monica Rent Control Board. Before starting, we wish to thank community members who took the time to send in their thoughtful and important questions for this forum. We will now turn to our Rent Control Board candidates. In alphabetical order, they are Lori Brown, Stephen Duran, John Mann, Nicole Phyllis, Naomi Sultan. Each candidate will be given the opportunity to answer a variety of questions with a maximum of 1 minute for each response. Questions during tonight's forum will be asked of the candidates in random order and according to a blind matrix created by the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica Education Fund. To conclude the forum, each candidate will be given 60 seconds to comment, rebut, augment, or clarify any topic raised during the forum. So let's turn to our first round. For this round, I will be asking a series of questions that will be answered by all the candidates. This is my favorite question. Executive authority is a much debated issue these days. How much authority to unilaterally make decisions is really given to an elected executive officer, whether it be the President of the United States, a governor, a mayor, or an elected Rent Control Board member? If you are elected, you will be one of 5 decision makers. So you'll actually not be in a position to unilaterally make decisions and enforce them. But we can all dream, and that includes you. So this question is for all 5 of you. You've been elected. Congratulations. You've been given absolute authority as a Rent Control Board member for 1 day to do one thing. What do you do? So, Lori, let's lead off with you.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a tricky question, and you're leading it off with me. If I was a rent controlled board member elected, what would I do for 1 day?
Any one thing.
I guess I would say free rent for everybody. Wouldn't that be wonderful? So I guess I would say a day of nobody having to pay any bills.
Oh, that is good. Steve.
Well, thank you. I'd like to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here tonight and to speak with everybody as you deliberate on who you'd like to select. I've served on the board for 4 years, and I know that that's not the reality of it. There's 5 of us up there, and my instinct is to consensus build. So what I would do with my 1 day would be to ask the community what their interests are, what they're suffering from, what the issues are, and try and consensus build, because that's kind of how I prefer doing my thing. So that's what I would do on my day.
Thank you, Steve. John Mann, please.
Well, first of all, I wouldn't want it to be for 1 day. What I want to do would be forever. I want to roll back the rents. I want Costa-Hawkins to pass, and not only roll back the rents for people who were living in apartments before a certain day, but the new apartments that are going up, they're rent gouging. And it's out of control, and that's why we had rent control in the first place. People have lost sight of that, and we need to go back. I've lived in Santa Monica for 40 years. I remember what it was like in the good old days, and those days are over, and they've been over for a long time, and I've watched what's been going on, and I'm angry. And I really want to do something about it, and I want to listen to the residents and the renters, and I want to make sure that they have a voice. I don't want to just listen to them. I want them to decide. I want them to have executive authority. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Nicole.
If I had unilateral power for one day, I would repeal Costa-Hawkins, because we actually, as a city and as a state, have the opportunity to do that on November 6th. We have the opportunity to come together and to rise up for rent control and to say that local control over our rent control laws should be restored to our cities. What Proposition 10 does is repeal Costa-Hawkins and allow the municipalities that have enacted rent control to decide whether they want to expand rent control, whether they want to change their laws, whether they want to potentially control aging, construction built after the passage of Costa-Hawkins. Creates a lot of opportunities to think about how we really want rent control to look for the future. So that's what I would do, and I would hope that my fellow citizens and residents vote the same way on November 6th.
Thank you. Naomi Sultan.
I agree with several of the candidates, including Nicole, who have mentioned the importance of repealing Costa-Hawkins. What I was thinking about when you're talking about if you had, complete power for one day, what would I do? And I was thinking about when I was testifying at City Council a month or two ago about the need to strengthen the anti-harassment ordinance. And I was thinking about all of the tenants that I met who were gathered that day to give testimony about the harassment that they experienced in Santa Monica apartments. Landlords refusing to fix different items, elevators, hoping that they would leave, under the pressures created by Costa-Hawkins to push out current tenants. So I would hope to, change the laws to create a system where people didn't experience that kind of harassment and could age in peace in their homes.
Thank you. Okay, well, we've touched on this so far, but the next 3 questions are related to Proposition 10 on the statewide ballot. Please focus only on the question asked as you consider each one. So Proposition 10 on the statewide ballot would repeal the Costa-Hawkins Act, which is a state law that allows rent-controlled units to be set to market rates when a new tenant moves in. Would this be positive for Santa Monica? Why or why not? John?
Absolutely not, because market rates in Santa Monica are through the roof. They're ridiculous. And that's because of all this overdevelopment. This city has gone crazy. The city council has approved development agreement after a development agreement. Now they want to build a 5-story building in Ocean Park, and it's not even in downtown Santa Monica. They're not satisfied with the land use and circulation element. They want to, and downtown, raising the zone limits downtown, they want to do it in Ocean Park at 18th or 28th Street. I forget which one, but it's ridiculous. They want to keep building all these buildings, and we don't have a housing shortage. What we have is rent gouging, and that's what has to end. And Costa-Hawkins, I hope, will pass, because if it does, and I'm on the rent control board, I'm going to go after those people that are building these, that are rent gouging.
Thank you, John. Nicole, please.
I fully support yes on Proposition 10. And I support it not just because of vacancy decontrol, which is what allows property owners and housing providers to raise rents to market upon vacancy. But I support Proposition 10 and the repeal of Costa-Hawkins because it creates a whole set of opportunities, including looking at expanding rent control, to different and new types of buildings constructed after the initial passage. Right now in Santa Monica, buildings constructed after 1979 cannot be subject to rent control. And if we repeal Costa-Hawkins, that's something that's on the table. It also returns local control to Santa Monica, which allows for the city to come together and decide upon our values. Costa-Hawkins has grossly undercut affordability in Santa Monica, decreasing our affordable housing stock almost 90%.
Thank you. Stephen, please.
To follow along, I also strongly support the passage of Proposition 10, which would eliminate Costa-Hawkins. And as Nicole mentioned, it's the other things that it helps to create. You know, Costa-Hawkins turned a community into a commodity, and it made people who are tenants a price. How much can you get for the next one and the next one? And that has turned really landlords against tenants. And what repealing Costa-Hawkins means is it provides opportunity not only for local control to see what the community's needs are, but it gives the opportunity, as Nicole mentioned, to expand rent control so that people who want to live in Santa Monica have an opportunity to. And we want them to age in place for those who are here to make it a vibrant community.
Thank you. Naomi.
I also support Proposition 10 and the repeal of Costa-Hawkins for many of the reasons that have been mentioned. Just within my own lifetime, I've seen Santa Monica just turn from a city that when I graduated college and I moved back here in the late 90s, I was able to rent an apartment on a waitress's salary. My apartment right off Montana was $600 a month, and I could live there and my friends could live in the neighborhood. And now it's hard to find an apartment here for 4 times that much. A working person, a person making $15 an hour, which is the equivalent of about what I made back then, would have to work, I think, 2.5 full-time jobs to afford the average 1-bedroom apartment in Santa Monica. The rents have just skyrocketed so high. But I'm also really eager to expand our stock of rent-controlled housing beyond 1978.
Thank you. Lori.
Thank you for asking this question. I am probably the only one on this panel that does not want Proposition 10 to pass. I've lived in Santa Monica since 1979. I was a renter in Santa Monica under rent control. In 1980, when rent control was established, we had 39,000 units on the market. Today we have less than 26,000, and we're losing them every single day. I believe that we are in a housing crisis. This is a statewide ballot. Santa Monica Rent Control has a strong voice if they're not doing a good enough job of protecting tenants' rights, or then that should be looked at. As a small property owner here in Santa Monica, I can tell you that I speak with the landlords, work with the landlords, and as some other previous people have said, I think that what we need to do is start working together rather than separating. Tenants need landlords, landlord needs tenants. Thank you.
Thank you. So if Proposition 10 does pass, what action or actions would the Rent Control Board need to immediately take? What other actions would be required? So, Steve, why don't you lead us off?
Well, the first thing we need to do is, because this is a charter city, we'd have to amend the charter to see what actions are taken. So there's going to be a 2-year gap about if it's repealed this November until the next election, when we can actually put in place new laws and regulations to figure out what we do. So it's in that time period, that 2-year time period, where I would really like to meet with all our stakeholders, tenants, renters associations, landlords, to figure out what the best solution is. One of the choices we can do is go back to rents back in 1978. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that's a choice that would sustain the renting market here. So we have to find a middle ground, and we're going to have to meet with people, stakeholders, community groups, to figure out the best approach moving forward.
Thank you. Naomi, please.
I completely agree that a collaborative process is in order. The great thing about Prop 10, as Nicole emphasized, is that if it passes, it will actually return control over local rent control laws to the jurisdiction. So the citizens of Santa Monica and the citizens of Berkeley and the citizens of anywhere that has rent control get to make their own decision about what works best for their communities. Here, we've seen like a major erosion of our affordable housing stock, our rent-controlled housing stock. So it's really important. I would advocate for, and I think a lot of other tenants and other neighborhood groups would support bringing in buildings built at least through the end of the 90s under rent control so that Santa Monica could become a more affordable city, like the city I was talking about before, that was people that aren't wealthy, people that are working people can afford to move in here and live here and raise families here.
Thank you. Lori, please.
You need to ask me the question again.
Sure, the question is, if Proposition 10 does pass, what action or actions would the Rent Control Board need to take immediately, and what other actions would be required?
Thank you for asking the question. The first thing that would need to be done is bring the stakeholders together. I'm the most experienced candidate and the only one who actually does speak to the landlords out there on a regular basis to understand what's going on. Without having the knowledge of owning a property and what it takes, I think that we are going to create a very, very, very unstable economy. What I would ask of the Rent Control Board to do was to start doing economic studies before they would just pick a number like they chose to pick in April.
Thank you. And John, please.
I don't want to wait 2 years, and I don't want to do economic studies. I want to start right away. I want to roll back rents as low as I can get away with. And then, but this is something nobody's talking about. These new buildings that have been going up all over, not only in Santa Monica, but all over LA County and all over California, not all over California, but everywhere that people live in communities that have a shortage in housing. So they're building these places, and we don't really have a shortage anymore. What we need is low-income housing. And what I would like to do, I don't know how to go about it, but I would convene a board of residents, and I want these people that are making all this money rent gouging, I want to tax them so they can pay for new housing, low-income housing that's run by the city, since they're collecting the tax revenue.
Thank you,
almost
John.
$1 billion in another 2 years.
Thank you, John. Nicole.
So the first thing that the Rent Control Board needs to do, and something that I'm proud to have already started working on with my fellow Commissioner Drawn, is pass regulations that would prevent rent rollbacks. That's something that the Rent Control Board has committed to doing because we recognize the instability and uncertainty that passage of Proposition 10 could create, especially among housing providers. And we've heard over the course of multiple meetings, and I'm looking forward to hearing from property owners and from tenants at our next meeting on Thursday about their concerns and passing common sense regulations that preserve the status quo and allow us to start building coalitions so that by 2020 we have engaged all stakeholders, we've engaged tenant rights community members, property owners, housing providers to come together with a ballot measure that truly has widespread support in the community.
Thank you. Okay, if Prop 10 doesn't pass, what action can the Rent Control Board take to protect affordability? Nicole, we'll start with you.
Sure. So if Proposition 10 doesn't pass, which I hope it does, we still have a lot of work to do. Some of the things that I'm proud to be working on right now are efforts to help address Ellising concerns. So increasing compensation and Ellis Act relocation benefits, but also providing pre-Ellis counseling services for property owners who are in distress or concerned about maintaining their property and making sure that they can have support from the city and try to find ways to hold on to their property. Other things that I think the Rent Control Board can do is work in a coalition with City Council to address the pernicious impacts of corporate rentals. We've worked on this already on the Rent Control Board and banned rent-controlled units from being rented to corporations, but there's much more we can do with the help of City Council and the Planning Commission, and I hope we can do it.
Thank you. John.
Well, it's going to pass. There's so much support for it, and there's so many people that need housing. I mean, we have people who work here who don't live here, and people who live here and make living wage salaries that can't afford to live here. I want them to live here. I don't want to see all this gridlock and the freeway in the morning and at rush hour. just total gridlock. So one of the things that I would do, like I said before, I would make the people who are building all of these expensive units all over the city, I would make them pay for it with increased taxes. And then I would take this huge revenue stream that we have in Santa Monica, $750 million almost, and it's going to be $1 billion pretty soon. What's that money being spent on? It's been being spent on the bureaucracy. Let's spend it on low-income housing so I don't have to pay $2,200 a month so I can run for office.
Thank you, John. Naomi, please.
Well, I also hope that Prop 10 passes, but if it doesn't, there's still a lot of work to be done about some of the issues that we've all been discussing. I mentioned harassment. I mean, apparently I've been lucky because I've been living in a rent-controlled apartment for almost 10 years, and I have not experienced harassment, but I was talking with my fellow Santa Monica tenants at this meeting that I spoke at, the city council meeting, and I was horrified to learn things that people were going through, and they were in touch with the city attorney's office and not able to get help because of some limitations in the ordinance, the way it's worded, it's not strong enough. So there's a lot of stuff we can work with City Council, hopefully, to do about improving that. I would also like to add to assist people, landlords and tenants who are going through the Ellis process in terms of counseling and also increasing relocation benefits for people who are displaced through no fault of their own, and also attack this issue of the corporatization of housing in Santa Monica and how it's completely out of control.
Thank you. Lori, please.
As a small housing provider, either way, if it doesn't pass or it passes, there'll be consequences and challenges ahead. If it doesn't pass, we'll be in the same position that we're at now, which is we have presently no representation on the board. We do not have any voice, and we're not being heard. Our present rent control board makes decisions based upon what they would like to see rather than what's possible. We have lost many, many units. We will lose more units, and I understand the reasons why we're losing the units. Our landlords have come to the Rent Control Board and told them why we're closing up shop, that we can't make it work, but they've refused to hear and refused to listen. They go back and can spew really good topics, but when it comes down to the economics of running a building, it takes money, it takes working together. Tenants need to work together with landlords, landlords need tenants, tenants lead landlords, and I would like to be able to change the environment so that we could stop some of these buildings from being Ellised. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve.
Thank you. Well, I would refute what Ms. Brown says about Rent Control Board members not listening to what anyone says who comes to our meetings or who sends emails or makes phone calls. We listen to everybody, or at least I certainly listen to anybody who will call and raise their concerns. We're not only concerned with the renters' rights and their ability to remain in place, stay in Santa Monica, to age in place, but we're also concerned with small landowners who want to stay there as well. It's vitally important for this economy, for our housing stock to remain in place. We need both. So I disagree with the statement that we don't listen to any of the landlords. That is not true, at least for me. And I know that's not true of my colleagues. We try to find just solutions for the problems that we're faced with. We'll have to remain diligent.
Thank you.
If Prop 10 isn't passed.
Thank you. So a major goal of rent control when it was adopted in the late 1970s was to preserve the affordable housing stock in the city. Yet each year we lose 400 to 500 units as they are removed from the rental housing stock, and there is no visible, affordable way to replenish. This is beginning to add up. Outside of repealing the Ellis Act, do you see any solution to this problem? Naomi, we're going to lead off with you.
Well, in terms of replenishing the affordable housing stock, that's one of the great opportunities that the passage of Proposition 10 would provide us, because unfortunately we are losing buildings, but we're not able to add. So if we were able to include aging buildings, but buildings that were built after 1978 within our rent control limitations that would really help stabilize rent for people in those buildings and make those buildings affordable for people that aren't wealthy. In terms of discouraging Ellis Act and other no-fault evictions, I think some of the things that we've discussed in terms of increasing relocation benefits and also providing counseling to these small mom-and-pop landlords, some of whom are still out there and are struggling with their buildings, to try to help them find other sources of financing that might assist them in weathering the financial struggles so they don't have to sell their buildings.
Lori.
With all due respect to the fellow members up here tonight, without having the experience of purchasing a building, what it takes to manage a building, and working with tenants and the rent control board, and making sure that your building is a wonderful environment for your tenants, it takes a lot of work. To talk about it sounds nice, but to actually do it takes work. If rent control worked, our buildings would still be there. As I said before, in 1980, it started with 36,000 units. We're down to 24. If it continues going at the rate it's going, we're going to lose all. Mom and pops will go out of business, and they will be replaced by condominiums. It is very difficult. I invested back into my community, and I'm telling you, I've been working with the Rent Control Board. I don't need education from the Rent Control Board to tell me what it takes. I know what it is. I think that they need a little education. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole.
So I think there's a lot of things that the Rent Control Board can do and that I'm looking forward to doing. One of the most important things I think that we could do is engage in a pre-Ellis counseling program where we help understand the pressures that housing providers and landlords are facing and help work through potential solutions so that they can retain their property. I also think we need to look at the drivers of why properties are Ellised, why properties are removed from rent control, and I think one of the biggest drivers is speculation. We've seen a very, very hot housing market, especially since the economic recovery, and with economic recovery comes speculation. So there are different things that our city can do, and we may need to do them on a citywide basis, such as an anti-speculation tax, which is something that has been considered. I don't think we can discourage Ellising, but I think there's a lot we can do to help people make other choices.
Thank you. Steve.
Well, it's a complicated issue with a lot of moving parts to it. First of all, it's not every building that's under the potential of being Ellis. It's some. So we got to identify through educating the community about who those people are who are in need, and then what can we do for those mom and pop landlords, let's call them, to keep them in place. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's important to keep them in place for the stability of our community. At the same time, we have to educate tenants who come to us, who have either been here a long time, who are involved in their lives and doing what they do, and they're not necessarily educated about what their options are. So we have to educate both landlords and tenants to help them find solutions that we can use to stabilize our community.
Thank you. And John.
You know, the problem really is, it's not just speculation. That started as soon as Costa-Hawkins was passed, and then property exploded in value. I know that Costa-Hawkins will be repealed, and when that happens, property values should go down. The city needs to start investing and buying some of these properties and subsidizing mom and pop landlords, giving them, helping them repair their buildings and their units so they could at least survive and not have to Ellis their buildings. There's just too much ado about how much money it costs to survive in a business and being a landlord. I mean, there should be attention being paid to the tenants, not to the landlords. They're the ones that are being represented by the city council because the city council keeps approving development agreements.
Thank you. All right. During the next 2 rounds, each candidate will answer a different question. You guys, listen carefully, because in a later round, you will each be choosing a question from these 2 rounds for you to answer. We provided paper and pencil for you to jot down your choices. Lori, we're going to start out with you. There's a large gap between families who qualify for deed-restricted affordable housing and those who can afford the current market rate. The question is, how can we keep these families, the ones in the middle, in our community?
You know, that's a good question, and I think about that quite a bit. And when we're building our new buildings today, it seems that we're not building for our families. Again, going back to the same question is, if we started to working together as a community, if Santa Monica for Renters' Rights was interested in working with the landlords, if the Rent Control Board was interested in hearing what the community needs, I think that we would start taking approaches. There are ways of doing things. Back in the early 80s, we had Torca conversions. There are ways that the city could invest money. Prop 10, as you can see, has been spending $100 million to try to solve this problem. The $100 million could have gone into a lot of affordable housing, and I believe that the city and the Rent Control Board need to work with our housing providers, and I say housing providers, to try to come up with solutions to this crisis that we have here.
Thank you. Steve, vacancy decontrol makes eviction of long-term tenants tempting. Santa Monica has strong laws protecting tenants. Are these laws effective, and are they being fairly enforced?
Well, as has been mentioned earlier, we're losing our housing stock. It's also turned tenants, as I mentioned, into a commodity. Let's get them out so that we can raise the rent to market rent, especially those folks who have been in place for a very long time. That's something that I don't agree with. I want people to age in place. I want people to stay here. So vacancy decontrol has been really a very bad thing for the residents in Santa Monica who want to stay in place, who want to grow old here, who want their kids to remain in place and have their kids live here as well. It has thrown the market out of whack, and so what we need to do is find ways to keep these people in place.
Thank you. John, what do you consider the top priorities for the Rent Control Board to tackle? At the end of your service as a Rent Control Board member, what would you be most proud of accomplishing?
Well, my goal on the Rent Control Board first is to create more low-income housing. That's my top priority. I want to go after the city. We have people who are making $300,000, $400,000 a year. I think the numbers are like over 100. The point that I'm making is we need to help the people that can't afford to live here, that are living far away and have to commute all the way to the city to mow our lawns, to take care of our children. We need to provide for them, and we need to provide for the people that lost their low-income housing. Thank you.
Nicole, all candidates make promises. If elected, you'll be one of 5 Rent Control Board members. How do you keep your promises? How will we know if you have?
That's a great question. You can know if I keep my promises because you can look at my record. In the 4 years that I've been on the Rent Control Board, I'm proud to have sponsored some policies that I think have made real differences on the ground in Santa Monica's for renters and in the preservation of rent-controlled housing stock. Just in August, I sponsored the item that passed the ban on corporate rentals, so rentals of rent-controlled units to corporations. Before that, I was proud to have initiated and co-sponsored an item that resulted in a $35 cap for all bond surcharge pass-throughs. That's one of the most progressive bond pass-through measures implemented by any rent-controlled jurisdiction in the state. It also protects renters from massive increases. Those are just a few things that I've done, and I think my record shows that I'm on the Rent Control Board because I'm serious about protecting our stock and protecting our renters, and I care about our values as a city.
Thank you, Nicole. Naomi, what do you see as the most important issue facing Santa Monica that falls within the purview of the Rent Control Board? What would you do about it as a member of the Rent Control Board?
Well, I think the most important issue facing Santa Monica and our communities is the complete, the real struggle to find affordable housing, to maintain affordable housing. Like I said, I've just seen our city go from a place that was affordable to working people, and also to people living on fixed income, seniors, people with disabilities, to now it's a city where if you want to move in here for the first time, you have to be working in tech, you have to be making 6 figures or above. So what I want to do is create more affordable housing through some of the things we've talked about in terms of expanding our affordable rent-controlled housing stock if Prop 10 passes. And I also, it's very important to me to protect people who currently live in Santa Monica, in the renters and the neighborhoods, because having stable renters and families that live here for years also creates stability in our communities. And I think it's a win-win.
Thank you. Okay, so again, for this round, each candidate will answer a different question. But remember, this is where you get to write down your favorite question or the one you wish you'd been given, and then you can answer that question. So John, we're going to start with you. Why do you want to be on the Rent Control Board?
Well, I have a new strategy. I've been running for city council for decades, and it's fixed. We don't have democracy in America. We don't have democracy in Santa Monica. It's fixed by special interests like Santa Monica's Renters' Rights, who are the ones who brought in rent control in the first place. How ironic is that? How many of those people, I want to find out how many people in Santa Monica's Renters' Rights are actually working for the city, but they won't release their membership list because they don't want us to find out. They don't want us to know who's making those 6-figure incomes. I want to find out. And then in 2020, after I clean up the Rent Control Board, I'm going to run for city council. And this time I'm going to win because public opinion is starting to wake up. And we're going to throw the bums out, and we're going to completely wash the slate clean and put residents in power.
Thank you, John. Nicole, so this question was sent in by a community member who said, quote, "It's my impression that this election year's biggest issue is that our residents feel that our elected officials are chronically, again, quote, out of touch with the priorities of the residents. What one thing will you do to address this complaint if you're elected or re-elected in your case? Be specific."
So I don't think there's actually any one thing you can do other than commit to listening to everyone on every side, including the people who tell you they don't agree with you, they don't like you, they don't come from the same place with you, they don't share your values. I think it's really important to listen actively, to see people, to try to find common ground. And that's something that I've tried to do in my campaign, from engaging with people on social media to attending different community forums. We're going to a community forum after this event tonight to continue to engage with people in our community, and not just our home base that makes us comfortable or feel good, but also engage with the people in our community who we don't necessarily feel so comfortable with, because those are the people who I can say I've learned enormous amounts from and whose values I think that we can respond to on the board.
Thank you. Steve, so what is your vision of the Rent Control Board's function in 5 years or 10 years?
A lot of that depends on what happens with Proposition 10. If Proposition 10 passes, it is going to be a game changer. It is going to change the way renting is done here in Santa Monica and in the state. And that is going to have effects that's going to last for generations. So assuming Proposition 10 passes, we're going to have to meet with all the stakeholders, community groups, organizations to find the best solution so that we can continue a community that is stable, lets people age in place, expands rent control so that more people have opportunities to live in this wonderful city that we live in. If Proposition 10 doesn't pass, we're going to have to remain diligent with ensuring that renters have their rights are protected, ensuring that landlords are listened to and their responses met, and we're going to have to continue communicating and get educational outreach out there so that people will know that they're being heard.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Naomi, the role of the Rent Control Board is limited in many ways. If you could expand it in just one way, what would that one way be?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I would really love if, were I to be elected a rent board commissioner, I were able to immediately create affordable housing. I wish that were within our purview, right? That was something that we could do. But if I were to be elected, that isn't something I can do. However, I would be able to work with, well, first of all, assuming that Prop 10 passes, I would be able to work with the stakeholders in the community on coming up with a ballot measure that would hopefully lead to expanding our stock of affordable housing. And I would be able to work with City Council and other and landlords and people in the community on ways to create more affordable housing. Because I think we all know, as important as rent control is, it's very important to, it's in some ways a numbers game, and that's a huge problem that we're experiencing right now.
Thank you, Naomi. Lori, as was said earlier, a major goal of rent control was to preserve affordable housing. Yet much of our rent-controlled housing is no longer affordable to those making average medium income or below due to vacancy decontrol. The cost for a first-time renter entering the Santa Monica market is nowhere near affordable. What can be done for those new arrivals to our city and our job market?
Again, thank you for the question. And I want to add that I have friends who live all the way around the country, and the prices of homes and living is expensive everywhere. Here in Santa Monica, we are losing our housing stock. We are going to continue losing our housing stock, especially if Costa-Hawkins gets repealed. It's really important that we all start working together. And when I say working together, I truly mean working together. I've learned over the past 5 years as a small building owner the challenges that we face, and we are not being heard. We are going to lose more housing stock. I came to the Rent Control Board in the beginning of the year, and I showed them that there was 170 buildings on the market, and they didn't even ask one question. So and hopefully I'll get elected, I'll be happy to work together to try to keep our housing stock, to keep our pricing low, and for everybody to understand where the grounds are, and then we can all start working together on solutions. Thank you.
So now you get to pick your favorite question, and you can answer it from this round that just finished or the round before. Any question that you haven't already answered. So Steve, you lead us off. What's your favorite question?
The question I will ask myself is, why do I want to be on the Rent Control Board? I've had the privilege to serve for 4 years, and I've worked with some extremely smart, dedicated people who have put the rights of tenants and landlords at the forefront of their thinking to try and find solutions. We've done some very good things in the 4 years. Commissioner Phyllis and I have taken part in a lot that we've done for our community. I want to continue doing that. I want to continue providing for the landlords, for the tenants, protecting the rights of tenants as we move into this next era of rent control, especially if Proposition 10 passes. As I mentioned before, that will be a game changer. I have the experience. I've worked on the board for 4 years. I know the pitfalls and the challenges we'll face, and I look forward to the opportunity. I hope for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Naomi.
So I believe I'm going, is it okay if I re-answer the question or add something to what I answered? Okay, because you asked me, I didn't realize we were limited. You asked me what is a major issue that is within.
We did ask that you answer somebody else's question.
Oh, okay. All right, so how do we know if you'll keep your promises? So I think I've always lived my life authentically. I'm a public interest attorney. I've never done anything in my life for money or power or influence. I've always wanted to do things because I believe in social justice. I'm doing the work that I do, which is defending veterans who are disabled and at risk of eviction from these evictions, and also helping assert their other legal rights. I do because I believe passionately in the rights of people with disabilities, and also I believe that housing is a human right. And so this is, I will put my soul into this, and I care deeply and passionately.
Thank you. Lori.
Great. My question is, why do I want to be on rent control? That's a great question, and one that would take me more than a minute to answer. The reason why I want to be on rent control is because I've spent the past 5 years as a Rec and Parks Commissioner, and I've learned what the purviews are. And I believe that the only one sitting up here that actually does own a building, and I'm not a bad apple landlord. I care about my tenants. I care about my community. What I want is to see my community stay the way it is. I like the way it looks. I don't want to see more high rises. I want my friends to be able to stay and live here. I believe that some of the decisions, well, I know that the decisions that have been made on the Rent Control Board over the past 4 to 5 years has been a direct response is that we're losing our housing. I myself, as well as other landlords, would like to have more of a voice, more diversity. We call ourselves an equal, diverse community, but yet we don't have a housing provider to give any influence. We've got lots of attorneys, but I think it's time that we need a landlord. Thank you.
Thank you. John.
Well, you mentioned that people are out of touch with their government, and it's a serious problem. This is what I want to change, and I've been doing this since the 60s. I was a member of Students for a Democratic Society. I've marched in protests from Martin Luther King to recently with the Democratic National Convention in 2016. And there is so much conflict of interest in politics. I am not a politician. I will never be a politician. I want to represent, I want the people. Democracy is ruled by the people. I want the people to take their power back in this city. And they haven't done it. They need to wake up. People that watch this show aren't really going to change things because it doesn't have a wide enough audience. I want to reach out to those people that really are being excluded.
Nicole.
Thank you. So my favorite question is, why do I want to be on the Rent Control Board? And it's my favorite question because I really think it cuts to the chase of why we're all here. I want to be on the Rent Control Board because I believe in rent control. I think rent control is more than a public policy. It's more than a political position. It is a commitment to the idea that housing is a human right, and that our ability to be housed, our ability to age in place with dignity shouldn't be contingent upon whether you can actually own property. I'm a tenant. I'm also an attorney. I'm a former law clerk. I've worked under judges. I understand what it means to serve our community. I understand the importance of serving without self-interest, of being a true public servant, and I want to use my experience, my knowledge, and my shared values with Santa Monica to really protect rent control for the future.
Thank you. So the next question will be answered by all 5 candidates. Even with the best protections of rent control, many of our longtime tenants, those aging in place or on a fixed income, are finding themselves rent burdened, often paying 60, even 80% of their income in rent. Even the allowed increases coupled with pass-through costs have greatly exceeded the increases in Social Security payments, often their only income. This leaves little for food, healthcare, transportation, utilities, the basic costs of living. So the question is the Preserve Our Diversity or POD program an answer? Is it affordable? What other ideas do you have? Nicole, will you lead us off, please?
Great. This is an excellent question because it strikes at the heart of our most rent-burdened population, which is seniors. The Preserve Our Diversity program is an excellent start. It's a pilot program, and I know that it helps seniors who may not be able to get housing vouchers or Section 8 housing still be able to afford their units. But there's much more that we can do. I think we can construct affordable housing. That means truly deed-restricted housing that is affordable based on the income of what a senior is making. That means that it shouldn't exceed the HUD standards for what housing says, or for what the HUD standards are for affordability. There are many things that we can do to protect our seniors, including expanding our POD program. And I'm really glad you asked this question, so thank you.
You're welcome. John, please.
I'm one of those seniors that's living on a fixed income. I'm spending almost my entire income on rent so I can run for rent control board. That's ridiculous. I have to get Meals on Wheels because I can't afford to buy food. And there's a lot of people like me, and not just seniors. This situation has been caused by our own city council. They are passing development agreements, approving development agreements. Ever since Measure LV was defeated, they've gone wild. And there's so many buildings that are Ellised out, and they're building these huge complexes. The city should be buying property in Santa Monica and building low-income housing. I can't say that enough.
Thank you, John. Naomi, please.
I completely agree that Santa Monica needs to build deed-restricted low-income housing. And I also, I think the Preserve Our Diversity program is a wonderful program because it really does help people who, as you said, are living on Social Security, and even, because Social Security has not kept pace with the price of housing and the price of living today, can't afford their rent. I think the reason that we need to Preserve Our Diversity and expand it is because we're not getting the expansion that we need from the federal government, from HUD, of the Section 8 housing voucher program. So I really think cities, jurisdictions like Santa Monica need to be stepping up and providing these ongoing housing subsidies to rent-burdened seniors and folks with disabilities so they can age in place and stay in our communities. I think it's a wonderful program, and I hope we can continue to expand it.
Thank you. Lori, please.
That's a good question. And of course, I believe in all kinds of programs to exist. I will tell you that I've lived in rent control for 27 years, and I'm a product of the TORCA conversion. And that's where the city loaned money to people who didn't have it so that they were able to buy their unit instead of it going to a developer. I would love to be able to sit on the rent control board and be able to come up with all kinds of ideas and work with city council to spend money on housing. I am excited to tell you that the property that I own lives across from a building that the city did work together with some other agencies so that we could put in our aging seniors, those who got displaced by building the freeway. What we do is we need to work together. It's expensive for all of us to live here. It's expensive for me to live here. The gas, the food, the rent, it's all expensive. We're all feeling it, and this is what is called a crisis. We need experienced people who walk the talk, who actually know what they're talking about, to be sitting on the board and challenging our leaders. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve.
Thank you. I am a big fan of the POD program. It helps those who are most in need. As I mentioned earlier, having people stay in place, continuing to live their life out in Santa Monica if they choose to, is an option that fewer and fewer people are getting. One of the questions, or one of the issues to this question, is that in terms of the Rent Control Board, our jurisdiction is limited as to what we can do. But one of the things we did do, and I was happy to be a part of this, and Commissioner Phillips talked about it, was the pass-through and the cap that we had, which helped people exactly like this, who were struggling to make ends meet. It placed a cap on the pass-through bond measures that they'd have to pay. Now it's capped, will be capped actually it is capped now, at $35. So it limits them, it gives them a chance. It's something that fell within our jurisdiction. It's something that we could do, and we did it because we wanted to help seniors and those in need.
Thank you. So the time for questions has expired. It's now time for closing statements. Each candidate has 60 seconds to close. During this time, you may also comment, rebut, augment, or clarify any topic that was raised during the forum. So, Naomi, we're going to start out with you.
So I mentioned that I am an attorney and that I represent veterans who are homeless, have disabilities, or at risk of homelessness. In the context of that work, it's interesting that people have been talking about dealing with landlords, because every single day I'm on the phone with landlords hammering out solutions to keep my veteran clients in their homes. I understand the concerns of landlords. If I couldn't be a good advocate for my clients if I didn't. And I also understand the landscape that we're dealing with in terms of seniors threatened with homelessness for the first time in their lives because of these unaffordable rent increases that people are getting. And I understand the vital importance of strengthening rent control, expanding rent control, and keeping Santa Monicans in their homes. I hope that you will vote for me.
Thank you. Nicole, please.
So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here tonight, because rent control is of vital importance, and it's really the community fabric of Santa Monica. Rent control is important because it does reflect a shared value that housing is a human right, and that that right to age in place and with dignity should not be contingent upon whether one owns property. I'm also grateful that we have a forum here tonight where you can hear from many different cross sections of our community. You can hear the differences in policy that we have. And while we do overlap on some issues, there are some issues on which we meaningfully disagree. Having this much interest in the Rent Control Board shows that Santa Monicans really care about tenants. Our community is 73% tenants, and each one of us has ideas about how and what our community should look like in the future. I hope that if I haven't earned your vote here tonight, that you talk to me in the future, because I hope on November 6th I can earn that.
Thank you. John.
Here in America, we deserve the government we elected. We elected Donald Trump. We let that happen because of apathy, basically, and that's what we have in Santa Monica. A bunch of uninformed, apathetic voters, residents that have lived here, that just moved in, have created a completely new demographic. Privileged white people are moving in here, and they're hedonists. They don't really care about social issues like I do, because I've lived a long time and I've seen the world change, and I've seen what's happened in Santa Monica. I see inequality where people who are living in the rent control housing are making six-figure incomes, like a certain person on our city council that I'm not allowed to mention.
We're not going there.
So, and then there's organizations like CCSM that are being very selective about who gets the low-income housing.
Thank you, John.
I want to investigate that.
Thank you, John. Steve, please.
Thank you. Thank you for having all of us. It's been a great pleasure of mine to work on the Rent Control Board for the last 4 years. As I mentioned earlier, I've had a great privilege working with the people I've worked with, my colleagues on that board. The next 4 years could be a game changer for the next generation, if not several generations. And I have the experience having worked on the past 4 years. I too am an attorney, and I've worked for people who have been tenants, and I've worked in employment law, and so I work and I listen to these people, and I really care about their issues. Here in Santa Monica, I've fought for tenants, I've listened to landlords, I've made decisions that have for landlords as well. I'd love to continue working for you for the next 4 years to do what we can to age in place and continue to have a great community. I hope I have earned your support, and you'll vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. Lori.
Thank you for having us here today. I would like everybody to know that I did not go to candidate school and that I am here because there's a need. There's a need in our community for our housing stock to grow and grow in a healthy way, not in an overdevelopment way. The way it's presently going, our housing stock will go. Our small mom and pop business owners, and I say that is people with 42 units or less or 50 units or less, are aging in place. They need help with the buildings. The buildings are aging in place. The decisions that have been made by the Rent Control Board over the past 5 years that I've been watching has been detrimental. We are losing buildings. They are being sold every single day. They say that they listen. They don't listen. They do not listen. That's why I'm here. I'm here to bring diversity. It is time that we have a housing provider on the Rent Control Board, 1 out of 5, that can bring some information so that people can age in place and that our rents stay low and that everybody can afford to live here and feel safe in Santa Monica and in their rental unit. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, at this time, we'd like to thank our candidates. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica Education Fund, we want to thank all of you for taking part in this candidates forum and for stepping forward to run for office. This forum will be replayed multiple times on Santa Monica CityTV Channel 16 and on cable channel 99, which is airing programming 24 hours a day, 7 days a week until Election Day. All forums are also available on demand at smvote.org. For more information on both local and state elections, check out Voters Edge at votersedge.org. We also want to thank you, our audience, our home audience, for your interest. It takes all of us to make democracy work. Remember, cast your vote by mail ballots or go to the polls and vote on November 6th. Elections are won by those who vote. Thank you.